Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome as you're coming in. And as you're all filing in, we're going to be turning on a few things here today. We'll be turning on a poll for you all today. If you'd like to take part in that, we will make that live. And 3, 2, 1. And where's everybody coming in from today? Sound off in the chat. Derek, where are you logging in from today?
I'm in Washington, D.C. today, traveling.
Washington, D.C. We're on opposite sides of the
Here we are.
continent. I'm over in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm always signing in from. Um, Looks like we got some people from a few different places. Looks like maybe someone coming in from Egypt, which is pretty cool. Right. And as people are filing in, I'll just bring your attention, sound off in the chat where you're coming in from. Feel free to take part in the poll that we've launched. We'd love to hear from you about how you are approaching our topic today, which is talent success, right? Retention, satisfaction, compensation, hiring, all the fun stuff, right, Derek?
A lot. I think it's a big topic. Yeah. We may need more time.
More time, yeah. Well, thankfully we're recording it too. Maybe we'll get a part two going and we'll come back in there if we get a lot of interest. All right. Well, as people continue to file in, I will get us started. So welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here at our latest webinar. I am joined today by Derek Dorner, the founder and CEO of Roosted. Derek, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Roosted?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Like you said, I'm founder, CEO. What we do at Roosted, the really short version is we help event companies get rid of spreadsheets. So we're an HR platform, but we also do a bunch of things that are super event specific, like scheduling and time tracking and payroll. So all of the workflows that event companies and venues have that are just really kind of specialized for their industry. So we try to solve a bunch of those problems for them.
Amazing. And for those of us who may be new to us at Event Temple or myself or our webinars, my name is Trevor McLean. I'm our Director of Partnerships and Growth. Event Temple is a hotel sales and catering software for venues, hotels, and it's there to help you with selling that space, making it easy, integrating with great tools like Roosted to make it so that you folks can your team that's doing great can have great tools to make it easier to do their job, to be successful, to sell their space. Um, and so today we're just going to hop into our topic. So as we mentioned, our topic here today is unlocking talent success. So retention, satisfaction, compensation, hiring, all that fun stuff, right? Great teams, basically. Some of the topics we're going to be talking around today are based really around like four main topics, which would be reducing team churn, the concept of A players, compensation and benefits, and addressing the timing and importance of hiring. So with that, let's dive in. And Derek, I'm just kind of curious, what's your opinion on the importance of reducing churn? Isn't it just kind of natural? Like that's what we always hear in our space, right? Which is like, hey, it's just kind of what happens. Should it be that way?
You know, we're an HR company, right? So we think about this a lot. We get paid to think about it. So what that means is you have to look at it really holistically because churn is it's impacted by a lot of things. It's impacted by your overall strategy. It's impacted by your hiring. It's impacted by people that transition roles, whether it's inside your company or outside of the company. It's impacted by things like compensation, which is a whole nother topic because compensation is not just cash, as we all know, right? So there's a lot here. We were talking before the call briefly, and I was explaining how I previously owned some big event venues in California. And I wish I knew now, what I wish I knew then what I know now, which is, we've learned a lot of lessons being in software and about how the software world works to create systems and iterate on those more quickly and think about those things more quickly. And I feel like I don't want to speak for the entire event world, but I feel like we get so focused on executing events and making that our core competency and having excellent high quality venues, and serving our guests, those things that we're really good at. And sometimes we forget about the back office, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It kind of ties to the concept. I'm not sure if you've read like the book, like Will Guidera's Unreasonable Hospitality. He talks about that, like not just for their guests, but for their team, right? And
Hmm.
it's one of those things like you'd almost think like in a lot of ways, like a lot of venues and hotels could be some of the best places to serve their team because of
Yep.
what they offer and the hospitality in the background and the service focus, right? Um, I
Yeah, I
guess I'm
mean,
curious, yeah, for
I
you, like, where did you maybe like where did you learn? Like, what did you learn, I should say, like where you are now that could that you'd recommend for organizations for reducing turnover?
yeah, I think, look, to me, that is, I think that's one of the big topics today that I have passion around, which is,
Yeah,
sharing some of those lessons that we've learned over the years about how to think about those things. One of the big ones that we have learned is really how to measure employee engagement. That's a critical one. I'm really curious what you guys do at Event Temple. I'll ask you a question in just a minute, but one of the things that we do internally and that we encourage our customers to do, but there's a bunch of tools besides Roosted that do these types of things, is employee engagement. So, for example, like surveys, pulse surveys. It's called XM, experience management. Trevor, how do you feel about your compensation at Event Temple? Trevor, how do you feel about your manager's performance? How do you feel about your own performance, right? Quick, easy ways to understand how it is that your staff is feeling about their role. Sometimes it's anonymous, sometimes it's not. Using that data in a meaningful way. We use a tool called Lattice here. I think it's latticehq.com. Um, and it's got excellent ways to promote employee engagement and learn those things so that you can understand how your employees are feeling. And then you use that as a feedback loop, and then you build it back into your hiring process. You know, you also build that, by
interesting.
the way, into your compensation process and everything else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. I guess I'm curious, like, have there been a couple like maybe examples like you have of like where that's worked out, like how it's worked
Well,
for you, or maybe even in other organizations where you've recommended it?
yeah, it's like, look, when we are, you know, I'm trying to think about this in a way that kind of makes sense in a linear fashion so that I'm not just all over the place when we discuss this, but so many topics are related to turnover. Like we were hinting at, a couple moments ago. So I may bounce around a little bit.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
we when we think about turnover and employee engagement, where we really start at is holistically at the top, and we think about the role. So we're hiring two roles right now, and they're in sales, but we start at what is the business trying to do, you know? And it's really easy, especially in the event world, because you may feel like it's relatively static, some of these roles. And if you feel like that, you may be missing something because things change more often than sometimes you think. And so if you're not regularly revisiting what your business objectives are and what those responsibilities include, what markets you're trying to serve, what they want, who's the best fit for this position, because it may no longer be who's in that role. Maybe they're a better fit for doing something else. How have people grown since since we last evaluated these things, right? So to simplify it, we start at the top is where are we trying to go? What are we trying to do? And then we think, well, what does it take to get there? What type of people do we want to encourage to fill this role? So we design our roles, like even on our commission spreadsheets. We define our goals, which is clarity into our compensation so that our staff knows how they're being compensated and what's important. Um, they understand what attributes and qualities we're trying to promote. And then those are in turn built into our compensation. So they are awarded for various things. And that's a whole nother conversation. There's a million and one ways to do that with, rewards programs, besides just cash again, rewards programs and, perks and just saying thank you. So I don't want to get too off track, but, it's a big topic.
Yeah, it's a huge one, right? I think everybody is always trying to avoid churn, keep people excited, keep people happy,
Mhm.
right? And like from there, and even sort of transitioning a little, right? Like great people usually they don't want to. The topic we've always said is great people don't usually need to be managed. They just need a
Mhm.
goal to go and go after.
Yeah.
So I guess like that even I personally love this topic of A players, like what separates them, right? Like I always go to basketball and sorry to the audience, but like
Yeah.
what separates Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant from other people? So I guess I'm curious to you, what what is an A player to you? And what do you think makes a great A player in your mind?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a small objection.
Sure.
I don't completely disagree on your phrase where you said great people don't need to be managed, they just need to be given the goal. This is true, but also if you give them systems and help
Yeah.
show them a path, then they will be even better.
No doubt. I can't argue with
Right. And
that.
I think that's one of the biggest when you were asking about some of the key learnings that I have had from moving into, I'm just going to call it a more structured world in software versus events. I don't know if that's a fair comparison. More structured in the sense that it's a little bit more corporate-y, and I think we
Yeah.
just roll out some of those HR systems more quickly here. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but that's my perspective. Anyhow, um, creating some of those systems is one of those big key learnings, you know?
Yeah.
And so when we think about, when I'm thinking about A players, look, they're easy to identify. An A player is somebody that to me, generally the team, when you talk about somebody and everybody's like, that Trevor, he's awesome. And then everybody else on the team is like, oh yeah, he's awesome. So it's usually self-evident in those. But I think that's the easy part. I think cultivating them, and so now we're kind of back to recruiting and talking about all of those things that manage, filling turnover and also avoiding turnover. A lot of those things are what contribute to A players. It's not just having them, but it's also finding them, curating them, having them, and then keeping them. Right. So having them is just one fourth of that equation.
No doubt. I think it's funny when I say like not needing manage, you talk about the whole carrot and the stick
Mhm,
idea,
mhm.
right? To me, I always think a great A player brings their own stick.
Yeah, yeah,
They're,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
often they're
yeah,
often the ones you don't need to tell them too much of like, hey, this isn't great. They're kind of coming to you with that. And they're usually like, well, I'm hitting this. Like this is what we're
yeah.
going for.
Totally agree. Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. I think look, motivation is definitely a major qualifier and when in the and when we're talking about A players, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when we're hiring and we're looking for those A players, that's a major part of what we're looking for. But the thing with motivation is, and the thing with that stick is it's not always there, and even the best people sometimes can lose that stick, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm
Absolutely.
big now on things like employee pulses, surveys, experience management, rewards, anything that we can do, whether or not it costs money, even just again saying thank you. Pizza parties have not gone out of fashion. They work for a reason, of just saying thank you and connecting with your team. But there's a bunch of ways to do that.
Yeah, you kind of actually you answered my question, which was really like about keeping someone like that, like satisfied, engaged, like again, like thinking about people who maybe don't need to be told to like go work hard. Like keeping them like goal focused or energized or excited. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, my answer is always like, I don't want to wake up and not want to go to work, right? You go to
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
it's like you spend so much time there. You want to like really enjoy it. Like, are
Yep.
there tips you recommend so that all of these fine folks here, their teams are waking up and they're like, I love what I do every day. It's exciting. It's fun. I work for the best place on earth. Is there anything you
I
recommend
think
there?
there's a lot. And I think a lot of people in this group probably know a lot of them, but the key is revisiting those. And I think that's worth talking about, briefly here. You know, creating a culture of recognition, like I was mentioning, of saying thank you, a positive work environment, and revisiting that and iterating on it, creating a policy. Even if it's just your own little policy, I'm going to revisit this every couple months or every week. I'm going to think about how I can create a more positive culture here. Look, in the hotel and event world, my experience is that people are passionate about what they do, very, very passionate. In some cases, in many cases, it wouldn't be worth it without the passion because it can be high stress. In some cases, the wages are not always there relative to the stress, and yet many of these people show up every day and just do an amazing 5-star job because they are passionate, right? But what that can lead to is things like turnover and burnout and low morale, a whole bunch of different challenges if we don't keep our finger on that pulse and really try to cultivate. And that's one of those, another big lesson that I've learned is how to cultivate that. And it's really simple. It's just telling yourself that you're going to do it and creating those systems. And there's a bunch of software out there that helps you with it these days that's cheap, but just kind of getting started on that goal is the single biggest and hardest step.
No doubt, right? Like that's a big one we have at Event Temple. We love the value of integrity, and we're very
Mhm.
defined on like, hey, you say you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it by then, or you're gonna let people
Yep,
know
yep.
why it didn't happen, right? Integrity is so important.
Yep.
Um,
Another thing, I don't mean to interrupt you, but another thing is like
please.
dynamicism within a role is huge because people generally, especially your A players, are generally going to grow. If you give them tools to grow, there's things like, I don't know if everybody's familiar with this acronym. LMS is Learning Management Systems. There's a bunch of learning management systems out there. They're cheap. If you're a bigger organization, you probably already have one built in. If you're a smaller organization, you can go get one for cheap. But they help provide things like leadership courses, general courses about how we want to run the business, what our own individual policies are, and so forth. But what these do is is generally, when they're well executed, they get positive reviews from within the company. People stay engaged with them. But they also keep people interested and they give people a pathway into something that is new and interesting. So if you're thinking about your organization from its overall list of goals and objectives, and then you organize your roles underneath that, then everybody will have a natural pathway from one role into the other. And those roles will fall in place. Does that make sense? Systematically removing stagnant, static, right, not non-movement from your process and from those roles brings a ton.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. This is something that we often try to engage in as well too. Is goal setting, constant goal setting with your team members. So
Yes, yes,
kind of like, hey, and like it's not even just work; it's like life, where it's like, hey, what are you trying to do this year? What do you
yes,
want to
agreed,
do? Where do you
totally agree.
see that in a couple of years? Like, we got that one classic Vancouver move. We love like what Lululemon does in that world, right? Classic. Every Vancouver company will quote Lululemon at some point.
What is that?
But
I mean, I know
it's
what Lululemon
the
is, but yeah, so
active wear clothing,
Mhm.
very, very famous up here. All started with yoga, mindfulness, like all of that practice, but they bring it
Uh-huh.
to work a lot. But a big thing,
Uh,
like we found success personally with is like that goal setting with your team, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
hey, you're trying to run a marathon this year. How's it going?
Yeah,
Are
yeah.
you running? How's that training going? Oh, are you feeling discouraged? Oh, why? And like it's a neat one because it makes you feel like you're organizing. Well, it doesn't just make you feel that way. It's because your organization is showing they care about your life, right? And
Yep.
your life and work, when properly done, can be very well integrated.
Yeah, and look, too, it's not honestly when I think when we first considered some of these things, I'm like, that's super cheesy. It's super cheesy, but
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
definitely a way to integrate this in a way that makes sense. It's not overwhelming and it's rewarding, and a little bit of cheese is cool because one of the things that's really important to us too is exactly what you were talking about, which is people that have the ability to set and hit goals on their own. And we want people to be growing in their personal life as well too, because then otherwise, I think the relationship is less valuable to everybody. But I'm really curious, what system do you guys use? Do you guys use anything internally, or do you just have kind of a way that you do it, or do you use a platform?
No, we don't really platform it. We're mostly it's like kind of process oriented, right?
Mhm.
Like we have our kind of standard, we have our regular
Mhm.
check-ins, our one-on-ones, our time spent with your team, right?
You sh- you should check out Lattice. I'm not a paid promoter for Lattice.
Hey, that goes for everybody, right?
This is, yes, everybody really, it's fantastic. We looked at a lot of them and it helps, like you can even go in and set personal goals for Trevor. And then you're going to set goals that are aligned with your
Well,
organization and then what you need to do to hit those goals. It's great.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hey Derek, like so we talked about like hey players, kind of like goals, things like that. Like how does one go about finding these passionate people, these goal-oriented people who are passionate and excited about hospitality and like want to wake up and love their job, right? Like where do you find these people?
Look, this is another big question. One of the things that we do here, I heard a phrase a while ago that resonated with me, which was hire slowly and hire slow and fire quick. Um, I like to think of it more like hire slow and fire and promote quick. Because what I mean by that is recruitment and management is a major part of this. You don't always know who those A players are off the bat. In fact, you rarely do. There's some luck involved in this process, regardless of how good your systems are. Um, And so recruiting is a major part of this. Um, we are constantly, I think you mentioned this at one point too, Trevor, at Event Temple, but we are just kind of constantly scouting, for the right fit for here and there. Some of these roles, they take forever to find, kind of your dream person. And then that person may not turn out to be your dream person. Maybe they're better suited for another role. Maybe they're not suited for your organization. A whole bunch of things can happen. So you should be pretty systematic about this process. Um, I think when you're talking about recruiting, um, you know, redesigning your recruitment and your interview process in a way that makes sense, that again is goal oriented, like what we do, for example, for these, I mentioned we're hiring two roles right now, is our first round of interviews is just a really quick lightning round so that we can just feel the energy, because that's huge for us. So we don't want to spend more than 10 minutes or so, with somebody. Definitely
Yeah.
not more than 15, because I just want to feel the energy, and it really doesn't matter who does that on our team. Um, it can happen over Zoom, because that'll communicate it, record the meetings, and then you guys can make some quick decisions on who you want to advance to the next round. Rebuilding a lot of these processes is not hard when you're thinking about the goals of, we're looking for A players. What does A player mean to us? And sit down and write that down. We're looking for somebody who's passionate. We're looking for somebody who has customer service skills. What does that mean? What we do all the time too is we go to Chat GPT and we're like, how do you interview? What are questions to ask to tell if somebody has excellent customer service skills, right? There's a whole bunch of tools that you can use out there like this, but ChatGPT is huge, right? That help you really just cut through the fat of the process, so that you can spend less time Googling and less time thinking about some of this stuff, and you can read it, and then you'll say it'll really resonate, build it into your process, and then iterate on that process. Even when you're even in this round of hiring, every interview you do will get just a little bit better because you're going to
Yeah,
constantly, God forbid, do not pull out the old hiring and interview docs from last year or years ago because you're not doing yourself any favors.
I agree. And it's funny, it's like gone are the days of single interviews, right? I think we all
Yeah.
probably had the single interview. And I'm sure there's
Yes.
probably some orgs still doing that. And if you're on this, probably one of the first things I would say is to tie with Derek's hire slow. I do recommend multi-interview approaches because there are people who are pretty good at interviewing, but that's what they're good at. And
Agreed.
oftentimes you want to kind of see like, hey, that energy you brought on day one, are you bringing that on day two? Are you a
Hmm.
little discouraged that we have to do a little bit more than one? If so, what does that say, right? Because you ultimately want someone, I'd say if you're committed to working somewhere for a long time, you'd probably be committed to doing a couple interviews to make sure it fits for both of you, right? You don't want to just jump in to either side.
100%. And again, this goes back to, what we're looking for generally. I'm going to make I think easy assumption, especially for this industry. We're looking for people that are passionate, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's a big key to explore during those interviews. And then we also want to test that on a daily and weekly basis, especially when they're brand new here, right? I have made mistakes before where somebody interviewed super well and then they just could not do the job. I'm sure we all have here, right? Well, at that point, whose fault is it then? It's really the manager's fault because you don't have the systems in place to spot that. They could have been either just dishonest or they could have just been hopeful that they got in there. They could have been on the edge and hoping that they could pick up some of those skills quickly enough. I think that's probably often the case.
Yeah.
They could have had something that went wrong in their life. Who knows, right? A million things could happen. But unless you have those systems in place there, then this is all our fault.
Yeah, no doubt, right? And I fully agree. And it's a funny one of nobody wants to get hired to get fired. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to hire someone to not have them work
Mhm.
out, right? I think both sides work, and it is on you as the organization and the interviewer to really make sure that the fit will work. Otherwise,
Yep.
ultimately it's a bit of a challenge, right? And yeah, I think like that slowness. But then actually let's move into even compensation because I think this ties into it, which is, and I guess I'm curious for you, where does that come into great recruitment, great retention, in your opinion, where like compensation may be like, how do you define it? Because we mentioned it's not just pay, right?
Yeah. When I was in the event world, we would think about compensation in what I would call a kind of an immature way, which was cash plus perks. You know, um, you get to work here, so you get all these little perks that may or may not mean as much as you think they do. And then cash, right? But there are so many other ways to pull those levers that may make it meaningful for your staff, right? And the reality is, I think that in this industry, um, this is not like somebody in data entry where, this is just a job. A lot of people here, they have some hard days or they have a challenging day where nothing went right, but they did their best so that it never bubbled all the way up to the guest, right? And they were that last line of defense and they go home exhausted. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And this is
totally.
like the classic story of working in anything hospitality, right? So, compensation has to be, it has to be a well-rounded package that really makes sense to them. So now we're back to talking about recruiting. We have in our structure, even for a tech company, we do a whole meeting within our hiring process for just comp and we sit down and talk about compensation. What are the benefits? It's our compensation and culture round, because we believe that while culture is not part of compensation, it's such a big part of it, and we want both parties to leave that meeting. So, the candidate and our side of the table to leave that meeting well informed enough to make a decision should a job offer be coming. Right. So make our expectations clear and try to explain about the culture so that they know what they're getting into. And
Hmm.
we want to hear from them. We want to hear clear answers that they're comfortable with compensation, give them clear opportunity to ask questions, and we can talk about culture and so forth, right? But to be a little bit more direct in your question, Trevor, there's a lot of there's some trends right now in HR, specifically around, I would say, like we're partners with a couple different reward companies that offer various types of rewards, you know, and there's a bunch of them. I know Lattice, who I mentioned earlier. I think they hook up with some, either they do it themselves or somebody. There's like a Vibra who does employee rewards, and it can be based on all kinds of things. You can create a system that's based on seniority, that's based on points, that's based on key performance metrics, based on all of the above. Or you could give them out to your A players or things like this, right? Um, Rewards are a tool. They're not the end all be all. Recognition is huge. It's absolutely huge. Culture is a big piece of, I would call, the extracurricular, formula here, because that's really why they do it, because they feel rewarded by their job, you know?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to think about. And I think that a couple minutes of research or a couple minutes of thinking about it will help you piece together your goals of how you want your compensation package to be, and then get into conversations with people when you're hiring. And you're going to see what resonates and what doesn't.
Yeah. I love what you said about recognition and almost seeing that as a form of compensation, because I think it's so true, right? Like, one of there's a fellow I saw, and he mentioned a really good thing where it's like, if you see something that you love about someone, genuinely compliment them, because people don't get compliments
Yeah,
nearly
right,
enough,
right,
or
right,
like
right.
they don't get shouted out for their hard work nearly enough. I'm sure we could all say that, you feel like you're going for it and then no one sees it, right? But
Yes.
I love that that can be a big part of compensation in its own way, right? People are just trying to belong and do good.
Totally agree. Trevor, look, that's brilliant. That should be in Event Temple's playbook if it's not. And I may steal it and put it in our playbook, in our handbook, right? Because like we have some things in our handbook that are the same thing. We call it a playbook, but it's really just a handbook. That is,
Yeah.
ours is say the thing, right? If there's a challenge, just say it. Let's get it out there. Let's understand what it is so that we can work through it and move beyond it and get back to serving our customer,
I
Yours
love
is a
that.
great example. And if we call those out systematically, then we can start to train people to think about things like this. It's almost like, look, it sounds super cheesy, but it's like that positive affirmations in the mirror. You know what I mean? But,
Ah,
you know, that stuff has an impact because it's something that you're doing every day, right? So writing those systems down about how you want to encourage this culture, it will have an impact, and it's always top down.
yeah, I can't agree more. What is that? Is it the Dale Carnegie line? Like, people may not always remember your name, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right, man. Yep.
Well, actually, I want to dive into just hiring as well, too, as we're getting further along into here. To you, when you look at hiring, like, and I want to lean on your venue experience here. When was always like the best time to hire, in your opinion? Like, when did you know it's like we need to get that person going?
You know, look, when I think there's some what I will call situational metrics here that are more obvious. So that's things like seasonality, things like big events coming up, opening up new markets. Those are things that are easier to identify. Um, but overall, this should all be guided by what we were talking about earlier, which is how you define your goals and objectives as an organization. Because it's really easy to say, okay, we lost a salesperson or we lost a chef and we need to backfill that role, you know? But when you look at this top down, you may say, you know, we don't need a salesperson in this job description that we were using 2 years ago. What we really need is somebody that's going to do sales 40% of the time and the rest of the time we need them to help us with this. This is the role we're looking for. It's kind of hybrid. What should we call it? So you have this
Yeah.
conversation about your needs first, and then you start, kind of puzzling, putting all these puzzle pieces together. That's how you create this role, and then that's how you really identify when to hire. I think there's a bunch of basic things to talk about, but I think you should ignore everything and focus on what the business goals and objectives are.
Mhm. And I think that'll probably get us to like that'll probably answer in its own way, which is like the who as well too. Like what qualities or it should like I guess maybe the question is because I bet you different qualities matter for different people. You don't need a chef who's back of house who's great with people. You need him to maybe be very good at attention to detail. But like how do you define the qualities to look for each role, including any level of role?
Yes. So look, excellent question, because this is what I would say is kind of midway down in this process. Like if what we're talking about is if you imagine a big funnel, and at the top of that funnel is going to be goals and objectives of the organization. And at the bottom of that funnel sits a box with a role in it, whatever we call that role, salesperson or hybrid or something. And midway down, we're trying to figure out how do we move from here to here, And in
Mhm.
the middle of that is going to be something like, well, what kind of people do we need to fill this role, right? Um, and that's where we start defining who we're looking for, what kind of qualities they want to possess, how we find those qualities, how we recruit those qualities, right? How we curate them, and how we keep them.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes tons of sense. And then maybe going into systems, right? So for people, they've defined those, they know when. What would you recommend is like best practices for finding that right fit, the best amount of time? What sort of process should they look at maybe to interview, understanding that they need to like maybe find someone for seasonality or anything
Yeah.
like that, right? Because not everybody can always hire slow, right? Like all the time, right? You can't start
No,
hiring for June and
right.
January. That's always a little
Right,
tricky.
right. Well, you're right, right. Although I do think you should always be recruiting, you should always be scouting to some manner,
Yeah.
even if it's just kind of experimental. We were saying, hey, we're always looking for people to join our organization that are superstars. We're not hiring right now necessarily, but love to speak with you. So just because you may find fits. But look, to answer your question more directly, it is, besides those easy ones, like based on seasonality, it's back to goals again. It's back to, when you need to fill these by and how long it takes to do that. So, like for us, when we're looking at those overall business objectives and what it takes to get there, when this role needs to be in place, then we can start to understand, okay, let's just say you're a national organization, you're going to have some type of idea about how long it generally takes to fill this role in this market at this pay rate. So that gives us some idea of, okay, we're going to need to place some ads and we need to see this many people kind of come through our funnel. You should be thinking about this very systematically and not just dumping it all on poor Julie, the HR lady's desk, right?
For
Um,
sure.
if you're a smaller organization, you should be using very similar systems because they're out there and they're affordable and they help you think through those things in a way that's really tailored even for your smaller organization.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. There's always, whether it be sales, whether it be anything, there's always some level of a funnel, like where it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
talk
yeah.
to 100 people, 50
Hmm.
people went to first round, 10 went to second, 5 went to third. We
Yep.
hired somebody, right?
Well,
Maybe it's
and
not always that simple, but there is some funnel out there always.
everything is sales though, right? Because I mean, don't you see people sometimes at other software companies and and it's the same thing in event space when I was working in the event space and you'll see somebody and you'll think, "Man, I wish that person was on our team. They are freaking awesome." You know?
Yeah.
Uh, So this is just it's part of that mindset.
I think that I forget what it's like called Everybody Sells. There's a book out there, but one of the things
Yeah,
that
what is
they
that?
talk
Yeah.
about is no matter what you do, you're always in sales because
Yeah,
sales
yeah.
is really just
Yeah.
the art of moving people. And it's
Yep.
like you got to
Yep.
chat with someone every day. It doesn't matter what you do, right?
Yep.
And you're gonna have to convince someone of something at some point.
Yep.
Um, well, Derek, this has been so great. These are my questions, but I'd like to open the floor to everyone in the audience. And I know we already have one question, so I want to jump into that one. And it's perfect because it's tied right to what we're talking about right now. And this comes from Troy. And the question was, what about when hiring for not so glorious roles? So, like unskilled entry level work, how does an organization find the great people or the good people? Or how do you go about that one?
Look, in one word, culture. You are never going to make a dishwasher be a glorious job, but it
Sure.
doesn't mean that it can't be a good, respectable, even fun job. And I can say that because I spent a lot of time washing dishes at venues and in kitchens, and some of those guys and girls are freaking awesome to work with. And it's about culture. It's about understanding where they are, what they need. Maybe what that is maybe it's thinking about a compensation package that makes sense in terms of, can we be semi-flexible with the hours on this? You know, is there a way that this makes sense for this person? What are they really looking for, right? Um, so look, your hiring process is obviously different because especially on some of these really entry level roles, you really kind of, because there's a lot more luck involved, you really kind of just are bringing people in and sifting through kind of, I'll call it sifting through the grains and seeing what's there, and less strategy on the upfront interviewing. But that doesn't mean you should forego any strategy on your culture and making sure that that top-down environment is excellent, because those people are exactly the same as everybody else in the organization who can be motivated by by culture. This makes me think one other thing I want to say too that's really important here that I did at all of my event companies. There's a book, I can't remember. It's something about, I'll give it to you, Trevor. I don't know if you can send it out, but it's
Yeah,
basically
absolutely.
Ritz-Carlton management practices. And essentially what you're trying to do, one of the theories in the book is tying the job back to the customer. So it's like, look, the janitor that cleans the hotel, that cleans the hospital room, is not a glorious job, but it is absolutely critical to get that hospital room sterilized, right? Especially when we think about something like an OR. Well, that person cleaning that room usually does so with such great pride because it's really easy to connect. If I don't sanitize all of this properly, someone could die, you know? And when they hear about successful surgeries, they understand those success stories. And we found great success with connecting our guest happiness back to all roles, glorious and not, because they all took part in it in their piece, whatever it was, even if it's from creating the proposal to washing the dishes, right? Of I helped do that thing. And so there's a whole bunch of ways to do that through reviews, letting them hear guest and customer experiences, use your own creativity there. But that was a really particularly successful technique for us.
I love that. And I like the other thing, and I want to kind of bring to light too that I thought was really great of what you said, just to maybe say it in how I interpret it is it's not just I love that tying to like what you're trying to accomplish, but also like tying it to that person because that person's probably trying to accomplish something, right?
Yep.
And like I've
Yeah.
noticed at least in my previous experience working in roles where there's whether I've been unskilled labor or I've worked with folks of unskilled labor, I love what you said about flexibility at times, like where that's tied to it, because it can't always be tied to like big compensation packages, let's be real. But like flexibility can be so important to someone because they may have a family, they may have another job that they're working, and just
Yep.
knowing that they can be like seen and
Yes.
understood and not feeling like they're like being buried, that is like weirdly like a massive empathetic open move that can make someone want to go through a wall for your
Yes.
organization,
Yes.
right?
And you can do things too, like, look, this is a little more directly related to compensation, but where possible, I encourage you to be bold and do things like, look, let's look at comp, in cash. And I'm not talking about just raising it, what else can we do? Because sometimes a raise is also harmful. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense, because if the culture's not there, there's no amount of money that people would do for this. And those are the places where, people have really high turnover. Anyhow, there are other things that you can do. Like maybe it's a mandatory half day mental day once a month, things like this that don't have a significant cost to the company. If you have any flexibility there that may have a huge impact, roll it out, test it, see what people think, see how important they think it is.
I think that's great. Um, Another question that came up during our conversation, which is tied back to when you were talking about hiring and management policies and practices. You mentioned revisiting and reviewing. How often do you recommend an organization reviews their hiring, management, practices, and policies, like all of that? Like, how often should an org do that?
Continuously. And I seriously, but it will get easier as you go along. You'll get better at iterating at it. The first time is by far the hardest. The next time it's
Yeah.
half as easy, and the next time it's half again as easy. And this, for I just mentioned we're doing a hiring round on this one. We reiterated all of our questions, came up with questions that were super goal oriented, that made sense, that helped us discover where these people were coming from and what's important to them. And we did it in minutes. Again, ChatGPT helps you cheat a lot because it gives you a great jumping off point. But yeah, look, it's continuously. What I would recommend is the next time you go through a hiring round, at least say, I'm going to spend half an hour thinking about this process. I'm going to think about what I want the process to be for the interview. I'm going to think about what the process should be for the ads, what makes sense, the language for those. I'm going to think about I'm gonna think about the questions that we're asking in the interview, all of those things, and that's iteration number one. And then test it. I can guarantee you it'll be better than what you did before.
Yeah, there's no doubt, right?
Yep.
Creation's almost always the hardest
Yep.
part. And it's even sometimes, no matter what at Event Hub, usually our first focus is like, get one out, get it
Mhm.
out. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter because
Yeah.
there's a million things that can go bad on their first try, but you'll never know what they are until you at least see it.
Yeah, and Trevor, we're talking about like a lot of kind of lofty things today about
Of
people
course.
feeling really good about their job. But the reality is, the world is messy and nobody has any time. So what we're talking about is objectives. So like when I say, look, you should be goal and objective oriented in your company and all of the things you should do should revolve around that. That sounds nice, but we also just have to get stuff out the door like right now. So
That's
what
true,
what that
right?
means
That's
on a practical
fair.
basis is set a basic goal, set some time aside, do your best, and revisit on regular schedules.
Derek, I don't think we can end it with on a better note. I think that was a perfect closing note as we look to wrap up today. I love that. Just go out there, do your best by your people, by your organization, whatever you can do. Let's all go out there with a smile on our face and serve some great guests, right?
Thanks for
Um,
having me today.
Thank you for being here. It was such a pleasure, such a great conversation. Thank you to everybody for attending here today. It was great to have you all. If you do have any further questions, you can always reach out to us. We can answer them. Maybe not as live, but we'll come back. We're happy to help. So Derek, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody today, and let's sign off.
Trevor, before we sign off, put
Yeah,
my email in the chat and shoot me an email, and I'll get anybody. If anybody wants to shoot me an email, it's DD like Delta Delta at roostedhr.com, and I'll get you the name of that Ritz-Carlton book that I read and implemented. I'm sorry to interrupt your
love
exit,
it.
Trevor.
Please, no, I want that book too. So send it over to me. You already know my
I
email,
will.
so
Cool.
I want to see that as well too. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. So much.